Disease has always been the most dangerous of killers. It comes in many forms and is culpable for the deaths of countless individuals, killing indiscriminately and without mercy. Perhaps the most dangerous aspect of disease is that it is invisible to the eye, making it a biological weapon far more deadly and evolved than any gun or other man-made counterpart. Disease has repeatedly reshaped the course of human history, expunging prosperous civilizations at will and entire races of people that have not biologically adapted to resist them. In fact, biological warfare is so destructive that it has been deemed a war crime, prohibited under the international humanitarian law. However, one incredibly impactful invention was successfully introduced in order to combat certain diseases: vaccines. As vaccines have been developed and perfected over time, the number of countless deaths caused by disease has rapidly diminished, especially in developed countries. A recent report by the World Health Organization states that with effective vaccination in developing countries, 1 out of 7 deaths among young children could be prevented. Smallpox and polio are two of the most widely known diseases in the world, and both have been eradicated or nearly eradicated thanks to the development of vaccines. While their impact is often understated, the two diseases have no doubt shaped the course of human history tremendously. Smallpox is one of the oldest natural diseases documented in history, and it is one of the most impactful as well. The origin of smallpox is unknown, but it is believed to have appeared around 10,000 BC, at the time of the first agricultural settlements in northeastern Africa. Smallpox has left a large mark on American history, a mark that predates the arrival of British colonists. The highly contagious virus was spread to the New World by Spanish and Portuguese conquistadors in the 15th century. This devastated the populations of Native Americans, who had no immunity to the disease, which heavily contributed to the rapid collapse of the Aztecs and Incas, two of the world's most advanced civilizations at the time. Later, the disease was used in one of the first instances of biological warfare during the French and Indian War, when Sir Geoffrey Amherst, Commander-in-Chief of the British Army, proposed its use against Native Americans fighting for the French. Physicist Edward Jenner was an English physician and scientist who was the pioneer of the smallpox vaccine, the world's first vaccine. Although it was widely known that survivors of smallpox became immune to the disease, inoculating patients with smallpox was often dangerous. Those who recover from smallpox commonly are left with severe scars, especially on the face, arms, and legs. In some cases, smallpox may even cause blindness. Operating on rumors that dairy maids were immune to smallpox after contracting cowpox, Edward Jenner successfully inoculated an 8-year-old boy with cowpox, coining the term vaccination. Since cowpox had much less severe symptoms than smallpox, Jenner's discovery helped save billions of lives and created a pathway for future doctors and scientists to cultivate vaccines to eradicate and treat diseases that had previously run rampant over broad swaths of human populations. Use of the vaccine spread rapidly across Europe, and on May 8, 1980, the World Health Assembly officially declared that smallpox had been eradicated. Smallpox research in the United States continues today, with scientists focused on developing vaccines, drugs, and diagnostic tests to protect people against the disease in the event that it is used as an agent of bioterrorism. Dr. Jenner's success created a blueprint for future medical research aimed at preventing the outbreak and symptoms of disease. His discovery proved that it was possible to stop diseases and combat the threat of pandemics, allowing the development of vaccines to become a legitimate area of research. The world's most prominent scientists and doctors began studying various diseases to understand how they function in order to develop vaccinations, which in turn led to a host of discoveries that are responsible for saving countless lives.
One such discovery was the polio vaccine, which American medical researcher Dr. Jonas Salk successfully tested on March 26, 1953. Polio was first recorded in the U.S. in 1894, but became classified as a national epidemic in the year 1952, in which 58,000 new cases and over 3,000 deaths were reported. Also known as infantile paralysis, polio was exceedingly feared due to its reputation for infecting small children under the age of 5. What made polio significantly more impactful than previous diseases was the element of fear that it injected into the public. Though most people infected with polio experienced relatively minor symptoms, the possibility of paralysis and death was very real and led to widespread paranoia. Schools, cinemas, public swimming pools, and sports arenas were all closed due to the fear of spreading polio, and parents waited anxiously during the summers for polio season to end. Although diseases such as cholera, typhus, and smallpox killed significantly more people, The highly publicized images of paralyzed children and iron lungs exacerbated the crisis. During the first polio outbreak in 1894, the first treatment of polio, the iron lungs, was created. These used a pressurized chamber to allow for easier airflow into someone's lungs, which kept them alive if their lungs were paralyzed. However, patients were completely restricted in that they could not ever leave the chamber, and it often left the individuals bored and uncomfortable. These downsides to the iron lungs, as well as the psychological fear that they induced, caused people to search for other ways to cure polio, leading to the creation of the first polio vaccine. This vaccine was created by Jonas Salk on April 12, 1955, and was revolutionary in that it injected dead viruses rather than live viruses into patients, greatly reducing the severity of symptoms from the vaccine itself. The Salk method continues to influence the process of creating vaccines for other diseases, such as whooping cough and influenza. Furthermore, polio is particularly impactful to America because of how it impacted one of America's most revered leaders. Former President Franklin Delano Roosevelt suffered from polio, becoming paralyzed from the waist down in the midst of his political career. While having such a disease may not seem like it would hurt a politician's career or credibility, for Roosevelt, reputation and the way he was perceived was everything. Luckily for him, he was able to conceal his disability until a few terms into his presidency, at which point the public had already gained confidence and trust into him. Even before his disability was publicized, Roosevelt stated in a speech, "You gain strength, courage, and confidence by every experience in which you really stop to look at fear in the face. You are able to say to yourself, 'I have lived through this terror. I can take the next thing that comes along.' You must do the thing you think you cannot do." Roosevelt emerged as an advocate for the disabled and attempted to reform the way that they were treated, presenting the fact that people should not be judged for whether or not they have a disability. While Roosevelt's story of success, even through his disability, is inspiring, he is the exception that proves the rule. The reality for many who are mentally or physically disabled is much different. The World Health Organization reports that over 1 billion people, or about 15% of the world's population, currently lives with some type of disability, making them one of the largest minority groups in the world. This number is only expected to increase in the future as the population ages and chronic health issues become more prevalent. Amongst the myriad of issues and social movements that have arisen in the history of the United States, those affected by disability discrimination have persistently been underrepresented and neglected, especially because people with mental and physical disabilities form a group that constitutes approximately 50 million individuals. Although conditions have improved over the years, the stigma and unfounded fear surrounding mental and physical illness has existed for centuries and continue to pose a problem. To this day, people with disabilities face near ubiquitous discrimination in the workplace and severe social and economic barriers that prevent them from advancing in society.
In colonial America, those with disabilities were often distanced from society and relegated to dilapidated farms and almshouses to be cared for by the town. Though these places did provide work opportunities and ample freedom, mentally disabled individuals were often placed with criminals and paupers, with no effective process or means of rehabilitation established by the town. As the country became increasingly industrialized, the disabled were transferred to hospitals and asylums, where they faced unhealthy living environments and diminishing chances of recovery. For those that were not in asylums, the mentally disabled were featured in circuses and often forced to undergo sterilization to keep their quote-unquote defective genes from being passed on. Dorothy Dix, a reformer who played a pivotal role in improving conditions of mental asylums, identified herself as the advocate of helpless, forgotten, insane, and idiotic men and women, of being sunk to a condition from which the most unconcerned would start with real horror. Despite the increasingly effective healthcare system instituted in the U.S. to overcome mental and physical disabilities, the widely held notion that disabilities were an unnatural and shameful condition continued to propagate in the U.S., leading to economic marginalization. The employment rate of the disabled among those willing and able to work is currently 35%, less than half the proportion of people without disabilities, and for those who do manage to find employment, the median income of the disabled is less than 70% the median income of others. Furthermore, many workplaces and public buildings simply did not accommodate those in wheelchairs, even for necessities such as bathrooms, stores, and public transportation. Although there was a pressing need for reform, disabled people often did not have the opportunity to express themselves in social movements until the post-World War II era, when returning veterans with mental and physical conditions such as post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD, were finally able to gain public recognition and bring to light the social and economic restrictions impacting the disabled. In an effort to prevent discrimination against those with disabilities, the Americans with Disabilities Act, or ADA, was passed in 1990. The ADA prohibited discrimination targeted at anyone with physical or cognitive impairment in all places open to the general public, and was seen as a landmark piece of legislation and a further demonstration of America's commitment to equality. However, the legislation was met with mixed results. Despite the best interests of the president and administration, the period immediately after the bill was marked by a decline in the employment rate of people with disabilities, a trend that continued at a steady rate even decades later. Along with the economic struggles of those with disabilities, this minority also faces a struggle to socially integrate effectively into society. Fears of those with disabilities, especially mental illnesses, are often unfounded and predicated on false assumptions. A recent example is the anti-vaccination movement, whose background comes from a 1998 observational study conducted by Andrew Wakefield. Wakefield published a brief report detailing a correlation between the measles, mumps, rubella vaccine and the onset of developmental disorders of 12 children, 9 of whom had autism. Despite the incredibly low sample size and the fact that an observational study, by definition, cannot establish a causal relationship, the study received immense media coverage internationally, prompting many concerned parents to irrationally choose against vaccinating their children. Almost immediately, 13 large studies were released with not tens of patients, but hundreds of thousands, all failing to find a correlation between the MMR vaccine and autism. But the vaccination rate continued to drop due to misinformation and the subconscious conviction of many that dying of preventable diseases is preferable to a mental disability. In the United States, vaccination exemption rates doubled from 1% in 2006 to 2% in 2016, effectively resulting in 3.2 million children being unvaccinated. The debate about the choice to vaccinate exposes an issue not regarding the legitimacy of medical research, but the pervasive and destructive stigma over those born disabled. Although the disability movement has certainly made huge strides over the course of American history with regard to healthcare, treatment, and financial assistance, it is far from complete. Not only does the public misunderstand and subconsciously stigmatize those with disabilities, but they also face oppressive levels of discrimination in many aspects of life, including employment, healthcare, and insurance. With the plethora of issues that the United States is facing, it is challenging for social movements to take hold and truly make a measurable impact on society, and this movement is no exception. Looking forward, it is the obligation of not only the local and federal government, but for all citizens to uphold the American ideals of equality and opportunity to contribute to a more accepting and egalitarian society.